Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Yes, today, finally, I am filming my August reading wrap-up. I know I'm very late and I have probably forgotten a lot of the details of these books, but the good news is that pretty much all of these books, I think actually all of them, every single one of them, I either talked about in a reading vlog, or if I didn't vlog that week, there were a few weeks I didn't do that, I still did like a weekly reading wrap-up, where I really went into specifics about my feelings about each of these books. So if you want more thought, more like breakdown of the books, what worked and what didn't, I would definitely suggest checking those out. They're just a few, they're all in the month of August for my channel. So let's go ahead and get started with some of my stats. But first of all, I want to point out I'm wearing my Moody Reader Club crew neck because it's finally sweater weather here. This is by Hello Lovely Box. I am a rep for them. My discount code is Crystal's Bookish Life 15 if you ever want to pick anything up. And I thought this would be appropriate to wear because I set a very ambitious TBR for the month of August. At that video, I had so many books on there that I wanted to read. I had asked friends to pick books for me. Jess, I'm so sorry if you're watching this. I am going to get to those books, I promise. And then, I don't know what came over me, like, I felt like I was on the verge of, like, a really big reading slump, and so I kind of just said, TBR, who is she? We don't know her, and I just got rid of it, and then I just mood read the entire month, and that led to me reading some things that were definitely out of my comfort zone, which were not typical books I would normally have picked up, but that resulted in some of my favorite books that I have read all year. So I was really excited about that. I had some really great finds in August, and I'm excited to talk to you about them. So if you hear me say hero, heroine, her, he, she, him, I am, it's probably because I forgot their names, because I forget stuff like that. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the video. We're going to go over some short stats and then we're going to talk about the books. And then I'll elaborate a little bit more on the ones that I consider to be my personal favorite, like my top 5 for the month. So, in the month of August, I read a total of 22 books. 3 of those were paranormal romance. I was really starting to get into a mood wanting fall to be here, and I always want to read paranormal romance when that happens. I read 15 contemporary romances, which is extremely odd for me. Now, within those contemporary romances, some of them, like, I broke down, like, there was a gothic romance that was in a contemporary setting. A lot of those were dark romances. Some were mafia romances. Very few were just straight up contemporary romances. They all were kind of on the darker side of the romance scale. And then I read 4 historical romance, and 2 of those were rereads. So I only read 2 new to me historical romances, which I think is the lowest amount of historicals that I have read in over a year, in a month. So that was surprising to me. Speaking of rereads, I had 2 books that were rereads for me, and I had 0 DNFs, which is pretty freaking awesome. Now, star ratings. I had 13 5-star books. 2 of those were rereads, and they still kept their 5-star rating for me. I read 5 4-star books and 4 3-star books. So, that was pretty exciting. I think that is a really good breakdown. I clearly had a lot of books that I really loved, a lot of books that really moved me and that just have stuck with me, and new favorites, and I'm just super grateful for that. So let's get into each book that I talked about. We're going to talk about it briefly, my feelings, and my star rating individually. So starting out the month of August, that was when I first started feeling like really reading slumpy, and so I decided I have been wanting to reread the series for so long, and it is the Night Hunter series by Janine Frost. This series, I can't remember if it was either this series or the Black Dagger Brotherhood series that was my introduction to adult paranormal romance, and I just became absolutely obsessed with it. I loved this series. I didn't finish it because I read it so long ago and all the books weren't out yet, but I loved it so much, and I have been wanting to reread it, but I've also been nervous that it wouldn't still be a favorite of mine. So actually, when I talk about rereads, I didn't include these 2. So I actually had 4 rereads. I reread 4 books, which is huge for me. I don't really reread a lot. I'm not a huge rereader, but apparently that was my vibe in August. So I actually had 4 rereads instead of just the 2. So this series is a paranormal romance series. It is about a half-vampire heroine and a vampire who is just one of the oldest vampires. He is extremely strong and powerful, but he is actually hunting down, like, evil vampires, and she is a vampire hunter who uses her half-vampire powers to try and track down the worst, basically all vampires, to kill them, because her father was a vampire. He was pretty he was pretty abusive with her mother, and they had a really bad relationship, so she's always had really bad feelings towards her father and therefore vampires in general. So when she meets Bones, the hero, they meet when she's actually trying to lure him in to kill him, and he knows exactly what she's doing because he's such a smart, clever, old, ancient vampire, and they end up forming this alliance where he is going to have her help him hunt down these very old, very dangerous vampires using her ability to find them because she's a half vampire, and the vampires won't be able to know that she's half vampire. They still think that she's human. So they form this alliance, they sort of begin this training routine, and of course they end up falling in love with each other, and it is just absolutely a fun time. This is one of the funnest books that I have ever read. I think if you haven't picked this book up, I would still recommend it. I think it holds up really, really well. It's a ton of fun. There is so much sexual chemistry between these two. There's great banter. It's funny. It's fast moving. It's just such a fun series. I love it so much. And if you love Buffy and Spike, if you watched Buffy the Vampire and you're a fan of those two, you for sure need to read this because he is literally almost exactly described as Spike, and it's just perfection. So this was still a 5-star read for me, and I was so happy about that. So then I ended up going right into book number 2 in the series, which is One Foot in the Grave, which just sort of continues our quest of these two to hunt and track down these vampires at the end of book 1. So there is not, the thing about this series is that there isn't a complete happily ever after in the first book. Like, this is the type of series that is very long running, and they are a couple, but they have like times when they're together and times when they're not. So, but it follows the same couple the whole time. This was actually really, really popular at the time when it was written. A lot of series did this too. And it works for me really, really well. I just think it's so fun, and I just really love the series. So 5-star for both of these. Super fun. Highly recommend it if you want a paranormal romance read. Okay, and then I read what has become one of my all-time favorite books, and that is Priest by Sierra Simone. I read this book, and if you want my in-depth thoughts and some really emotional reactions from me, I would highly recommend that you check out my reading vlog. I will have it linked down below. But I was extremely surprised at how much I connected with Father Bell's story in here. This book is an extremely taboo romance with a Catholic priest and a young woman who comes to his congregation seeking some guidance or maybe even some forgiveness. She's really struggling in her life. She is an erotic dancer, and she is in a relationship with a married man. So Father Bell and Poppy have this extremely powerful connection right off the bat, and it is very much driven by their physical desire for one another, and that's where the taboo element comes in because he's a Catholic priest. But they have a connection that is so much deeper than that, and that is really explored in this book in such a beautiful and profound way. I really, really deeply loved Father Bell's, or Tyler's, conversations with himself and his musings about his relationship with God and the church. It was absolutely beautiful, and I was really, truly surprised at how much this book moved and inspired me, and just, I had so many feelings while I was reading this book. This is beautifully written. Sierra Simone is an master with words and storytelling, and it is extremely high heat, and it would definitely maybe have some elements in here because of the type of relationships they have that I can see how it would definitely not be for everyone if you are a member of this faith, but for me I thought it was completely beautiful. I loved their connection. I loved the discussions about faith and spirituality. I just thought it was so perfect. In this book, I didn't technically call it a 6-star read, but this is definitely a 6-star read for me. It's one of my favorite books of the year. I loved it so much. Okay, and the next book that I read is Dark Notes by Pam Godwin. I really went on a Pam Godwin bender in the month of August. I was reading her books to get ready for a live show that I was invited to join with my friend Jen from the Book Refuge on her channel, where we actually got to chat with Pam Godwin. It was an incredible experience, and I'm so grateful that I got to be on that live show, and I loved and adored every single book of Pam Godwin's that I read that month, but this one in particular really stood out to me. It was so powerful and so beautiful and a little bit haunting and definitely a little bit upsetting. This is a very dark romance. This also has taboo romance elements in that we have our heroine Ivory, who is a high school student, and she has had some really horrific things happen to her in her life. She is a victim of some pretty severe sexual assault. She is actually in a very abusive relationship with her family, and her mother is pretty much absent and doesn't protect and provide for her family, so Ivory takes it upon herself to earn money to allow her to stay in school and to help her family survive. And the only way that she has to do that, the only currency she has available, is her body. And so she uses that to sell to the boys in her school to try and survive. And it is pretty heartbreaking and also really beautiful to see this extremely strong young woman not crumble and really just disintegrate under some of the tragic things that happen to her. And it is the love story of her and her teacher who moves into the town, who is a definite dom. There are elements of BDSM in this book as well. And it is that relationship that was so completely fascinating to me, because Emmerich, our hero, is extremely dominant and he is very alpha. But when it comes to Ivory, he uses those in a way that really allow her to have some agency for the first time in her life, which was such a surprising thing for me and was so cleverly and well done in this book. I thought it was just such a beautiful concept and it was executed perfectly. I thought it was beautiful and heartbreaking, and I adored their romance. I thought it was just fantastic. This is another book that I rated 5 stars, but really is probably a 6-star book for me. It was truly fantastic, kind of mind-blowing, but again, full of trigger warnings and a little bit heartbreaking at times. But the ending of this book is one of the most satisfying endings that I have ever had, watching someone really come out of that darkness in their life in a powerful and hopeful and inspiring way. I just loved it so much. Okay, and the next book that I read is Vow of Deception by Rena Kent. This is a mafia romance, and to be quite honest, I don't really remember this book much at all. I gave this book 3 stars, and I feel like that was maybe a little bit generous for me because it really wasn't super memorable. It really wasn't super enjoyable. It wasn't terrible, but it was one of those books that, like, I read it and I was just like, eh. And then I forgot about it pretty much completely after I finished it. I did like the concept of this, and that we have our heroine who is sort of like living on the streets, and she is kidnapped by this mafia boss whose wife has recently passed away, and he kidnaps her because she is the doppelganger, literal doppelganger of his wife, and he uses her to sort of keep this mafia plan in progress and things like that. So I felt like that was such a really interesting concept of having a contemporary romance with an actual literal doppelganger, and I thought, how is this going to play out? This could be really interesting. This could really, really, really shock me and wow me, and I was hyped for that. Also, this book is very hyped on TikTok, and that was one of the reasons that I bought it. But sadly, it really didn't live up to the hype for me. I felt like the execution fell very, very short. It had so much promise in the overall storyline, and the characters were really interesting. Our hero is extremely dominant, and I really liked their sort of beginning relationship where he is a widow and she's kind of looking for a savior, but they really butt heads and are kind of enemies too. So I was hopeful that this would really hit me and wow me, but it just unfortunately didn't. It left me very underwhelmed, and I was just sort of like, okay. So I've now read this book by this author, and I really don't have a desire to read anymore because I wasn't super impressed with it. So, okay, and the next book that I read is another one of my favorite books that I've read of the year, and that is Broken Vow by Sophie Lark. I was on a mission to finish this series, and I read this book. This is, I'm not entirely sure which number in the Brutal Birthright series this is. I think it's maybe 5. But it was fantastic. I loved and adored this book so much. I freaking loved our hero, Raylan, who is a cowboy, and he is connected to the mafia family, and it is the story of him and basically a mafia princess, and he ends up being her bodyguard, and they end up going to his Montana ranch, and it is a beautiful setting. This had a really great, interesting, fast-paced plot where our heroine was in danger and our hero was really trying to protect her, but there was like some subterfuge happening in the background building this mafia world to the ultimate conclusion, which is going to be the next book that I talk about. And this was just fantastic. I felt like this had such a great blend of heat, emotion, plot. It was just honestly perfect from beginning to end, and our hero was a dominant cinnamon roll, and it was just fantastic. I love this book so much. This was a 5-star read for me. Okay, and the next book is the last book in the Brutal Birthright series, which is Heavy Crown. This book follows Yelena and Sebastian. Sebastian we meet in Brutal Prince, and he was basically this star athlete, and then he was injured in the events that happened in Brutal Prince, and his career was sort of taken away from him. This book is an extremely powerful and extremely fast-paced mafia-based plot that is such a complete thrill ride. I was captivated by this book. But there are also some really, really interesting character dynamics and emotional relationship dynamics between Yelena and Sebastian, where she's basically kidnapped by him, but she also has sort of this secret plot where she is, I don't want to give it away, where she's definitely trying to ensnare him for her family's mafia purposes. So you have two warring mafia families here who are trying to have, I guess, dominance in the mafia world at that time. It was just so well done. This book had a ton of action. It was super fast-paced, but there were so many wonderful moments of emotional development between Yelena and Sebastian, and some really interesting insight into Sebastian's character and his motivations for living his life and what he ultimately had to take on at the end of this book, that it was just so powerful. And I felt like these last two books in this Brutal Birthright series were perfection for me. I felt like they were perfectly plotted, perfectly paced, perfect levels of heat and emotion, and I just wrapped it up perfectly and had me just with my appetite completely whetted for the Kingmaker series, which is featuring the children of the characters in these books. So loved this book. It was fantastic. 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is The Sinner by Emma Scott. This was a paranormal romance, and this was an ARC that I received. I was really excited about this book because it's basically about a fallen angel, or he's actually technically a demon, who pretty much lands in our heroine's backyard. She goes out there for what she assumes is a dead person, only to see that it is actually a pretty much naked man with raven wings out of his back, and I was very intrigued with that. And I really, really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. It's a pretty interesting look at these two who feel completely drawn to one another, and our heroine, she continues to have these flashbacks from times in the past and what she believes is our demon hero who has shown up, and she can't figure out why she's having all these flashbacks. It doesn't look like her interacting with him, but she feels like it's a hidden memory. So come to find out, these are two souls who are soulmates, and they have just been trying to find each other throughout the years. He was punished for some crimes that he committed in life, which made him basically a demon for all eternity, and she is just able to come and be reincarnated lifetime after lifetime, constantly searching for her soulmate. So it had such a really beautiful setup. I really loved the concept of this. I love the concept of soulmates and fallen angels and demons and trying to get some redemption from that. So this was a really fun book, but it was just lacking a little bit on my complete fulfillment of that complete arc that I wanted for someone who really committed some sins, so they were relegated to like a fallen angel and then climbing up and getting their redemption. And I felt like I didn't quite get what I was hoping for there. It didn't quite get executed as well as I was hoping for. Some things were glossed over, some things were rushed, some things were hurried. But overall, the concept of this was fantastic, and I loved the ending of this. I thought it was a beautiful culmination of these two star-crossed lovers who have been searching eternity to find one another again. Okay, the next book that I read is 10 Ways to Be Adored When Landing a Lord by Sarah MacLean. This is the second book in her very first historical romance series, and I honestly was pretty underwhelmed with this one as well. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars, and it's probably my least favorite Sarah MacLean book that I have ever read. So this has a really predictable historical romance plot where we have our lord, our hero, who is basically a scoundrel running around living his life, living his best womanizing life, and he's trying to avoid any situation that would force him to marry because he doesn't want to marry, and of course all the ladies are out there trying to trap him and win his hand so that they can be married to a lord. Our heroine is one of those women who definitely doesn't want to just entrap him until she's forced into some circumstances where she has to marry to protect and preserve her younger brother's birthright, and that's how these two run into each other. I felt like there wasn't necessarily anything super wrong with this. It just falls into a lot of the similar tropes and situations that Sarah MacLean is known for, things that if you've read her books before, you've seen her do it in pretty much all of them. So I feel like even though this was early on in her career, it has a lot of the repetitive elements that she does, so there really wasn't anything new or anything fresh. It was just an okay book for me, so I was a little disappointed, so I gave it 3 stars. Okay, and then I got back into Pam Godwin and I started reading her Deliver series. And so I read the first 4 books in that Deliver series, so we're going to talk about each of them individually. I have the first 3 in this beautiful hardcover bind-up, which is absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to just quickly talk about all 4 of those in sort of this blanket summary, basically, because I feel like if I give too many details of each individual book, it's going to sort of spoil what happens in the earlier books. So books 1, 2, and 3 follow a set of characters who, the first book is actually Deliver. I have to look at and see what each title is. And this book starts with our 2 main characters, it's not really our hero and heroine, our 2 main characters who are sex traffickers, and they are out to try and find a very specific type of person for someone that wants to purchase this person for sex slave reasons. And so they find our hero Josh, who is sort of a golden boy. He is very submissive. He is a all-star, football player. He's just basically the golden boy, perfect, charming, cinnamon roll type of hero, very submissive type of man. And Amber ends up, is her name Amber? Quit! Quit. And Liv, our heroine, ends up running into him and tricking him and kidnapping him, and then begins training him to be a very specific type of sex slave. And along the way, this book is completely captivating. It is extremely dark. These are dark romances dealing with captor-captive situations, sexual assault, sexual abuse, physical assault. There are eating disorders in here, mental health issues. These books are packed with trigger warnings. But I feel like these books really allowed me to see the complete adept power that Pam Godwin has for writing a story with the very darkest elements of humanity. And in that depth of the darkness there, we get to see her really explore what these people are doing with their life, what kind of choices they're making, how they're sort of forced into making the choices that they do, and how they feel about making those extremely awful, difficult, bad, dark, whatever you want to call it, choices, and still coming out on the other side as an intact human and trying to find a happily ever after, despite all of the trauma and all of the abuse that they have gone through. I feel like these are incredibly powerful books. They are so beautiful. They are just mind-boggling. I adored all of the books that I read in here. The first 2 books were my favorite that I have read so far, and it was Deliver was the first one, 5 out of 5 stars. And Vanquish was the second one, and this one was really a 6 out of star book because of the redemption arc of Van, our hero in here, and his relationship with Amber. It was one of the most beautiful experiences that I have ever read in watching these 2 very, very flawed, very, very traumatized people overcome their issues and the darkness in their lives and really find a happily ever after. It was powerful and mind-blowing, and I will never forget this book. It was fantastic. So this one was another, probably a 6-star read. The next 2 that I read, Disclaim and Devastate, feature different characters, and I still really enjoyed those. I felt like they were also really beautifully done, really, really well handled. But when I compare them to the first 2 in the series, I felt like they were lacking just a little bit in that beautiful way that she has of really creating excellent redemption arcs and really providing a lot of meat and emotional interaction in her character relationships. So they weren't awful at all. I mean, I still loved them, but they were 4-star reads, whereas the other 2 were 5 and 6-star reads for me. Okay, so another book that I read was Gothichana by Rue Nix. This one was a Gothic inspired romance. It has a little bit of paranormal vibes, it has a little bit of mysterious vibes. This one is the perfect book to read for spooky season. It was so atmospheric, and it was such this really immersive experience to read the story of this young woman who has some type of mental health struggles, mental health issues. Her mother has just been recently taken to a mental health hospital, and our heroine, she receives this invitation to come to this boarding school for college, and she decides to go because she doesn't have any family, she doesn't have any reason not to, and she's very intrigued with this school. This school is really shrouded in mystery. There have been some human sacrifices that have happened there. There has been some mysterious deaths. There's just a lot of mystery and sort of darkness surrounding the school. And she, from the moment that she gets there, she sort of feels these vibes. She hears some voices that she's not sure if they're real or not. So this book has a lot of that paranormal aspect vibe that sort of keep you guessing, is this something that is paranormal or is this something that is realistic, and maybe it's a mental health struggle. And the love story in this was fascinating, and it was extremely steamy, and it was fantastic, and it is between our heroine, who is an adult college student, and her professor, who is absolutely dominant and protective and alpha. And I just loved this book. It was such a fun experience to read. It was a 5-star read. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. If you want a gothic romance with some mysterious vibes to it, definitely pick this up for the spooky season, because I just loved it. Okay, so now let's talk about the 2 rereads that I had. They were both historical romances, which I have talked about on my channel before. I reread The Hunter by Kerrigan Byrne. One of the reasons I picked this up is because I wanted to see how I felt about this as a darker historical romance after I had read so many of Pam Godwin's, and I just kind of wanted to see if I still loved it, because Kerrigan Byrne is one of the first historical romance authors that I got back into way in the beginning of 2020 when, like, quarantine first happened. I reached for The Highwayman, picked it up, and just fell in love with Kerrigan Byrne, and it was such a complete comfort to find these dark historical romances at a time when the world seemed really scary, and I just loved it so much. So I read and completely immersed myself in the first 3 books in this series, and The Hunter I remember completely loving, because this is the story of an assassin who is sent to go and kill this young woman who has a young child, but he ends up falling in love with her, and it was just dark and delicious. It was perfection. I loved this book as much the second time as I did the first time, so this was a 5-star read. Love, 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 love this book so much, and love Kerrigan Byrne. And then I reread Devil in Disguise by Lisa Kleypas. I listened to this on audio to get ready for our Rake Appreciation Society live show that I do with Jen from the Book Refuge. This was our book for August, and this book is one of my favorite books of the year. This is a 6-star book for me. It is one of the most romantic books I have ever read about our Scottish hero and our widowed, very capable, very much adored heroine, Merritt, who is the daughter of Lillian and Marcus from one of the Wallflower books, and I just love this book so much. It is such a comfort read to me. I think this is Lisa Kleypas at her best. She is just breathlessly romantic in here. This is one of my favorite books of the year. I adored it. I can't say enough good things about it. I've talked about it a lot, but one of my favorites. Okay, the next book that I read was also an ARC. I read I'm Only Wicked With You by Julie Ann Long. This is a historical romance. I really enjoyed this book. I felt like, so this is the first book that I'd read by Julie Ann Long, and I think that she has a really great writing style. She has this way of really building her characters up very slowly, very subtly, and she has some really fun banter between her characters, and I really liked how the setup of this, where we had an American businessman and we had an English society lady who really loves art, and they're sort of thrown together through circumstances and ruination and things like that. But this book wasn't a new favorite for me, but it was still really enjoyable. I really, really liked her writing style, and I definitely want to check out more books from her. But it wasn't a book that stuck with me or that I think is any type of a favorite. It was just lacking a little bit of an emotional punch in the romance. But everything other than that, like, the world was really convincing. It was really soft and lovely, beautiful, really well done writing, but there was just something that was kind of lacking in the romance that just didn't wow me. And so it was a 4 out of 5 star. Okay, so the next book that I read was Sugar Daddy by Lisa Kleypas. I read Blue-Eyed Devil in July, freaking loved that book. It became a new all-time favorite. I love Blue-Eyed Devil so much, and so I wanted to go back and finish the series. So this is Lisa Kleypas' contemporary book. This is the first book in the Travis family series, and this one is actually a women's fiction book, which I didn't know. I thought it was a romance, but it is definitely a women's fiction book. It's marketed as women's fiction, which is totally fine. I just was preparing. I went into this expecting it to be very romantic, which is what I have come to expect from Lisa Kleypas. And this was romantic, but the overall story in here is really about Liberty. Liberty is our heroine, and she is very poor, and she ends up in a situation where her mother passes away, but before she did, she had a baby, and there was quite a big age gap between Liberty and her little sister. And when Liberty's mother passes away, she ends up taking that baby and raising it as her own. So it's very much Liberty's journey, her story of surviving and thriving in Texas and trying to do that despite all odds, but also trying to find love along the way. This book is a bit of a love triangle in that we have Hardy Kate, who is our hero in Blue-Eyed Devil, and then we have the Travis brother in here, who is our hero. And I did enjoy their romance. But honestly, like, the shining star in this book was really Liberty's journey, her story. I did give this book 3 out of 5 stars, and I think that's largely because I was so disappointed that it wasn't the romantically swoony book that I was hoping for from Lisa Kleypas. But looking back on that now, I think it's probably closer to a 4-star read because it's really just a beautifully written story about Liberty and her sister. But I did give it 3 stars. It's definitely women's fiction, but it's not a bad book. It's very enjoyable to read and follow Liberty's story. But I was hoping for a little more romance. Okay, so carrying on, I then decided to read Smooth Talking Stranger, which is the next book in the series. And this book follows our heroine, who also kind of finds herself with a baby that is not her own, that she sort of adopts and raises. But in this case, it is her sister's. Her sister ended up just having this baby, wasn't ready to take care of it, ended up taking it to her mother. Her mother is kind of a deadbeat mother, and so our heroine in here, our heroine Ella, ends up taking over the baby and raising it as her own. But the whole time you're reading this book, like, you're kind of really worried that the sister is going to come back into the scene and say that she wants her own baby, because Ella doesn't ever really get legal custody of it, at least early on in the book. So that's sort of this fear the whole way through. I was like, oh my gosh, she's getting so attached, and then her sister's gonna come and get this baby. And I was really worried about that. But Ella is a really wonderful character. Like, she's extremely capable. She is the type of woman that just has had to do some really difficult things in her life because her mother is basically a deadbeat mother, and her sister needed her, and so she's kind of raised her sister. So she's sort of grown up in this way where she takes on all this responsibility and doesn't ever really consider her own happiness, and that's where she finds herself now. She's in a relationship with a man who she doesn't really love, she doesn't have strong feelings for, and she finds herself really just absolutely completely falling in love with this role of a mother to Lucas, her sister's baby. Now, as she is trying to find out who the father to her sister's baby is, she ends up meeting Jack Travis, who is known for being a playboy, and she wants to know, hey, is this your kid? Let's do a DNA test. So they end up having a relationship that starts out as a friendship, and Jack's just admiration for her and her ability to take care of this baby and take care of situations that he doesn't feel like maybe she necessarily should have to. So I really, really loved that about them. I felt like they had a really interesting relationship. I did end up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars, but I think it's a really high 4-star, and that's largely, again, because the focus is so much on Ella and her journey and on her relationship with this baby. And that was the best part for me, was watching Ella just fall in love with this baby Lucas and feel so much joy and happiness and satisfaction in being a mother. I really loved that. I thought it was really beautiful. The romance wasn't my favorite, but it wasn't terrible either. It just isn't what I was wanting from a Lisa Kleypas book. So 4 out of 5 stars for this, but I really enjoyed this one. Okay, and then I read the last book in the Travis series, which is Brown Eyed Girl. This book is a little bit, I think, controversial. I feel like this one follows the path of a Lisa Kleypas romance a little more closely. I definitely feel like this one felt distinctly different to me, as far as it had much more romance right off the bat, and it carried through the whole book, you know. Although it was still very much our heroine's journey, the romance in here was very front and center as well. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars, and that's largely because I just didn't love our heroine. She wasn't terrible by any means. I didn't really love how she kind of had our hero on the ropes and sort of was putting him in a situation where he had to make this choice without being willing to make any sort of concession on her part where they could actually come together and be together as a couple. I feel like she was putting all of that on him and trying to force him to sacrifice for her. And I don't love that, but I also really felt like I didn't love how she thought about her body. Like, she was extremely hyper-focused on her body, very negative about her body and her appearance. She is a plus-size heroine, and and I really hated to see her down on herself so much like that, although I'm sure that it was, I mean, I could relate to her struggles about body confidence, but I wish that it had been presented a little bit different in here. So ultimately I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. This book is definitely my least favorite in the series. I think that if I were to rank them, it would be Blue-Eyed Devil, Smooth Talking Stranger, Sugar Daddy, and then Brown-Eyed Girl. Okay, and then on like the very last day of the month, I ended up reading 2 of my favorite books of the year that just swept me away. I started reading this because I heard Jessin was talking about it. She had just picked it up, and I was obsessed with it from page 1. I love these books so much. So these 2 are MM romances, and they are about a family of psychopaths that a doctor, a psychiatrist, I think he's a psychiatrist, has taken in. He has gone out to seek them and adopt them, these boys who showed psychopathic tendencies in their childhood. He went to go seek them out, adopt them, and sort of create his own brand of Dexter-esque killers, where he allows them to kill people, but only like the worst of the worst type of people that even like the authorities wouldn't be able to catch. So they are sort of like vigilante heroes out here murdering people and letting themselves be their beautiful psychopathic self. And it's fascinating. It's completely fascinating. Like, these books are such a thrill ride. I love and adore them so much. These were both 5-star reads for me. They were some of the most addicting books I have ever read. I absolutely loved the relationship that both of these books had. They're, like, the heroes in this book are so completely out of their head for their love interest that it is adorable. Jessin called these heartwarming serial killer books, and they absolutely are. Like, these are the ultimate touch him and I will kill you. Very protective, very possessive, just absolutely in love with their love interest, but at the same time, like, they're psychopaths, and so the whole time they're thinking, I can't love, but also, like, I feel things for you, and I need you to be safe and stay with me forever, and it's just fantastic. So this book is the first one, and this is the youngest brother in the family, Adam, and he is a model also. That's his day job, and he finds that he's being followed by this young man who is actually the son of one of his earliest victims that he murdered. And so this whole thing ends up being unraveled, where they find the history of what actually happened to the boy whose father was killed by Adam, the psychopath serial killer in here. And it's just fascinating. Like, the plots are completely engaging from first page to last page. I just loved them, and I love the romances. They're incredible. So this book is also about one of the brothers, or one of the adopted brothers, and he is actually sort of like this ultimate psychopath in that he really loves killing, he really loves torturing, and he is incredibly, incredibly smart, but he also has, I think it's an eidetic memory, where he remembers everything that anyone has ever told him. And he just becomes completely fascinated and obsessed with another professor at a university where he teaches at. And this other professor is there. He is an ex-FBI agent, and he is sort of being tracked by another serial killer who he tried to bring to justice. So the love interest in here is actually a clairvoyant, so he touches people and he can see their memories and their feelings and everything like that, and it added just this another layer of this. It was just like the icing on the cake. Honestly, I can't recommend these books enough. I loved them. I was obsessed with them. I was so obsessed with them. I read them in probably like 4 hours each, and I literally, this is one of the few books that I started and I just could not put down until I was finished. I loved them. 5-star reads, fantastic. Highly recommend these. If you are ever in a reading slump, give these a shot, because I guarantee you they'll get you out of it. Okay, well, there we have it. There is my August reading wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, my friends. If you made it this far, please feel free to leave me an apple emoji. That would be fun, and I'll see y'all in my next video.